Wait, Sam, where have you been, Mocha?
Hello, and welcome back to Super Hell, aka the Mysteries Podcast, a show where two recovering Supernatural fans subject themselves to a rewatch. I cannot emphasize this enough, so no one else ever has to watch Supernatural again. Do not make our sacrifice be in vain. I'm Ollie. I use any pronouns, and you can find me on social media at OllieFresh. It's fresh with a PH.
And I'm Claudia. I use she, her pronouns, and you can find me on social media at Klaudia says, K-A-L-U-D-I-A says. We're starting off this week with a viewer question from TikTok.
Yes.
You can always send us an email, or you can send us a Q&A on TikTok.
Or on any of our social media. You can add us. We're here.
We're just out here.
We're terminally online, so we'll see it.
Yeah. It's a question from user the actual Kate Bishop on TikTok, who said, how do y'all think Sam reacted during the 2016 clown shit? And okay, there was a lot of clown shit that happened in 2016.
Yeah, they're not talking about the American politics clown shit.
Yeah.
They're talking about literal clowns. For those of you who don't live in the US or weren't paying attention during 2016, there were about like 2 months during the summer of 2016 where people were dressing up in clown costumes, and it was causing like mass hysteria. Like the girlies, meaning like people were talking about it on the news, being like, there are clown sightings. What does this mean? Is this some sort of gang? Is this some sort of... In reality, what it pretty much turned out to be was just a bunch of random people being like, oh, I saw someone scaring people wearing a clown costume, so I'm gonna wear a clown costume. Like, it was just a bunch of copycat people, and then a bunch of fake like clickbait YouTube videos. But for a while there, people were genuinely like for real scared that they were gonna get like murdered by clowns. That there was a clown apocalypse coming.
Yeah. Oh, it was foreshadowing to Dean dying on a rusty nail from a juggalo clown. So
true. But the question is, how do we think Sam would react? And one thing I think that Sam would do, I think he would see that and be like, oh, that's stupid. But maybe it's a case. Dean, maybe we should look into this. I mean, I don't know, but it just seems like it could be something. And Dean's like, I think it may just be a bunch of jackasses dressing up as clowns. And Sam's like, well, we don't know that. I don't know, man. I just think we should look into it.
Which is funny because, like, normally it's Dean being the one who's like, I think it's a case. And Sam being like, is it though? And if you listen to our last episode, you'll know about the foundation of Sam's canonical fear of clowns. So I don't know, because it's like, maybe he might be the person who's like, I don't think it's a case, because he doesn't want to go near clowns.
Yeah, he's like, I don't want to look into this, but we need to get someone to look into it.
He's like, I don't know, maybe Bobby can do it.
Yeah, he's like, maybe, can we get Bobby to look into this? The idea of Bobby being like, Sam, I've got news for you. This is just some teenager who bought a suit from Party City.
So the reason that we are starting off light is because the 2 episodes... Hello, we are now into season 2 of Yay, We Did It.
Let's go.
The 2 episodes that we have for you today are either quite dark or have a lot going on. I forgot how much they just front loaded at you in season 2. I think they were like, oh, we get to continue. Now we can do all the plot and character development that we weren't sure we can do. Yeah. And it's like, oh, I feel like I'm being hit over the head with a bat.
I think we as a society have forgotten what the 22 episode structure does to television.
Well, I think these episodes feel like as if I was watching a streaming series with 8 episodes. Like, they just threw everything at me because there's only going to be 8 or 6 episodes. Like, these, I was like, whoa, because I'm used to them being like, Monster of the Week, here's a little something.
Yeah. I do think that the fact that they are jamming a lot of character development up front really does reflect, like, later on in the show when it's, like, seasons, like, post-season, like, honestly, post-season, like, 7, they're like, we already did a bunch of character development and building. We need to create more issues for these men to be repressed about.
Yeah, and it's also very weird to watch some of these episodes now because they're dealing with some of these issues, and, like, there were some pretty major ones that were like, they kind of already dealt with this early, and now we gotta, like, do it again, basically. Like, I was watching one of them, this first one is about vampires, and I was like, they do this, like, 6 times. It's like they forgot about earlier seasons. It it gets a little wild, but are you ready for the first episode, Ollie?
I'm so ready. I've never been more ready.
All right, so let's start with season 2, episode 3, Bloodlust. I want to start this off by saying both of these episodes have some crazy guest stars, like the pinnacle of like character actors of all kinds of shit that you see in everything, in US television. The big one in this episode is Sterling K. Brown, who was like been in everything and then, became an Emmy winner and in the MCU and all that kind of shit, whatever. But you're like, holy shit, that's Sterling K. Brown.
Yeah, and he is not even the only, like, I feel like he is probably the most like mainstream, like, guest actor in this, but also like Amber Benson, who's in Buffy, who's my best friend, who is one of the first characters who is a lesbian that I saw on TV, where I was like, oh my god, you can do that. But she played Tara in Buffy, and you also have Ty Olsson, who's my best friend, and we'll talk about him more because he is so slay.
Also, she plays a vampire in this, which is very funny. Also, Ty Olsson, if you didn't know, the funny part is he plays one character, a vampire, in this episode, but then he plays another vampire later on, which is
in the same show.
In Supernatural. They just kind of do that sometimes. But also, you may know him as the voice of Ord from Dragon Tales, and that's what's important.
That is what's so important. He has been in so much stuff. I've been a Ty Olsson stan since day one, and the other girlies are just now catching on.
Obviously, Sterling K. Brown's best role, obviously, is as Kipo's dad in Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts, clearly. If you haven't seen it, that's my recommendation for actually gay media you should watch instead of Supernatural. Go watch Kipo instead. It also has Sterling K. Brown. It has actual gay people in it. It has far better racial diversity, and it's just a very Yas and Slay show.
I do fear that racial diversity is going to be something that we have to talk about in this episode. But
this is going to be another episode where you go, did anybody think about this twice? Maybe?
Yeah, and it's also one that's like, it has like some very, very good moments, and then you think about it a little too hard, and you're like, interesting. Do we want to get into it?
Yeah, so we start out with our typical Supernatural cold open. There's this girl, and she is running through the woods. She is screaming, crying, throwing up. She's being chased by something. She trips, and she gets back up, and she like keeps going, and she hides behind a tree, and she doesn't hear anything, and so she like starts to come out, and then there's nothing there, and then she turns around, and something gets her with this like long curved knife, and you just see like the blood spatter, and it chops her head off, and her body falls down, and then we get the Supernatural like whoosh, and as we talked about last episode, the openings for each season are different. This one might be one of my favorite ones because it's like the fires of hell with the demons and all that kind of shit. It has the little star over the A in Supernatural, which I think is slay. And then they cut to the Impala, and I know why this episode stuck in my mind, because they're playing Back in Black by AC/DC, and it's not just, they're playing a very Yas and Slay song, and like that's why it's stuck in my head, is like I always associate it with Supernatural, even though it has nothing to do with Supernatural. They just play it. The reason it sticks in my head is that it's supposed to be a big moment, because this is the if one remembers, the Impala got fucking T-boned by a truck, and it was in pieces before, and so now Dean has fixed it up. He's like, oh my god, life is good. We've got a job. My car is fixed. Sam is like, do you like need a moment alone with your car? It's very like man of the car.
Do you guys need a room? Also, no, because Dean Winchester must have some very magical like car repair ability. Like that is the Supernatural case we need to investigate, is how Dean Winchester managed to not only remove every single dent but also make it look like a brand new car. Like what is happening there? Yeah,
one could say it's Supernatural.
I actually don't think they could. Never mind. Podcast over.
So this is kind of like an iconic moment. He's like, oh my god, the car is back. I'm back. It's supposed to be symbolic because like his dad just died, and he was, as we know from the last episode, he took out a crowbar and started beating shit up. He was not feeling very Yas and Slay. So Sam's like you're in a really good mood. And Dean's like, yeah, I've got everything. And Sam says, I'll give you a couple of severed heads and a pile of dead cows and you're Mr. Sunshine. And Dean's like, yeah, I am. And you're like, man, you are fucked up. and they're going to some place called Red Lodge. I don't know what state it is. I believe it's Florida. Because they make a comment about Florida, don't they? Yeah, so he's like, all right, how far is it to Red Lodge? Apparently this is Florida. This is probably one of the few times they go to Florida. This whole episode doesn't look like Florida, except for like one thing that looks maybe like docks of some kind. It looks like the Midwest, because everything looks like the Midwest in this show. But then he's like, oh, it's another 300 miles. And Dean's like, great, foot on the gas. And like, okay, King, you need some therapy. Which is kind of the plot of all of these episodes. So they cut to the sheriff's office, and they have the sheriff. He's telling them there's a murder investigation. There's not much I can share with the press. And it cuts to Dean and Sam in suits. They're clearly pretending to be the press, working for a newspaper. 2006, when local news still was a thing. Anyways,
the good old days? Question mark.
Shout out to the Gannett workers. I stand with you. So he's like, yeah, I can't really tell you much, whatever. And then Sam is like, okay, but, so you found the last severed head last week, because there's been severed heads and cows and stuff. And then there was another one 2 days ago.
Because he was like, oh, yeah, so there's these cows and stuff. And the sheriff's like, bitch, are you serious?
It's one of those really good realistic moments where like, yeah, if someone said that, you'd be like, I'm sorry. Like,
yeah. And he does also talk about how, like, he's like, dude, I have horrible news for you. When cows die, if you just leave them out there and don't do anything with them for 48 hours, they will melt and look like they've been all messed up. Like, that is just what cows do when they die.
Yeah.
So, there's no such thing as cow mutilation, dog. Stop asking.
Also, where are there cows in Florida? Are they supposed to be in Florida? I don't know. Anyways, but
you think you come to us for the hard facts, and we're here trying our best. We're not getting paid for this, so...
So yeah, Dean's like, what about the cows? And the guy's like clearly you're not a country boy. And Sam's like, well, what if there's a connection? And he's like, why would there be a connection? He's like, ritual stuff. And they're like, yeah, satanic ritual stuff. Dean says it. And the sheriff is like, y'all are fucking crazy. Get out of my office. And then he's like, it could literally be like, stop. And he goes, what paper do you guys work for again? And they like, Dean says one thing and then Sam says another thing. And he's like, you guys are fucking idiots. Like, get out of my office. So they cut to the morgue, and they don't do morgue scenes very often in Supernatural, but this one was pretty gross, I'm not gonna lie. They cut to the morgue. They're in white lab coats. Don't know how they got in. There's
Walked
another
in.
Yeah, there's
Winchester
another
privilege strikes again.
Literally. There's another guy there, and I gotta say, it kind of looked like Dean was checking him out. I'm projecting, but a little bit.
I choose to believe he was.
Yeah, I choose to believe he was. He kind of looks at his name tag, and he's like, okay, there's a J. He's like, oh, John. He's like, oh, Jeff. He's like, oh, I'm so sorry. And he's like, yeah, this other doctor, he's been looking for you. And he's like, that other guy's on vacation. He's like, well, he's back, and he's really mad. So, whatever. And he's like, oh, shit, and he runs out.
He's screaming, crying, throwing up. If you don't get in there right now, you're gonna lose your job!
Like, there's some resident, like... There's like a doctor, like, you're in a morgue, but again, this is Supernatural. We're not here for the facts. And Dean is like, okay, Sam, do the Satanists in Florida mark their victim?
And the sounding he says yes. Like, what is happening? This episode is like, it's so, there's so many things that they say that sound like when they say it in the show, it's like, oh, that makes sense. But then when you read it back, you're like, what are you talking about? What are you saying?
It's so much. And Sam's like, yeah, they mark them on the forehead. And so then they pull out a box, and Dean's like, open it. And Sam's like, I don't want to. And Dean's like, you're fucking wuss. And he opens it himself, and it's a box with one of the people's heads in it. And they don't find any mark on the head or anything. And Dean's like, okay, well, we need to look in her mouth to see if, like, the murderer stuffed anything down her throat. And I'm like, okay, if it's already in the morgue, wouldn't they have already performed an autopsy?
I mean, to be fair, it depends on how quickly, like, like, how quickly the turnaround is. But I'm assuming if they had to drive all the way there, probably, especially if they think there's a murder. What's also funny is, like, what if he stuffed something down her throat? She's a severed head. Someone would have.
Well, not like murderers use logic, but so they open her mouth, and Sam's like, I ain't gonna do it, and Dean's like, you can do it, and Sam's like, you think I'm the wuss? And they're like fighting back and forth, like neither of them wants to do it, and Sam's like, fine. So then he like reaches into the box and opens the mouth. And then he's like, Dean, can you get me a bucket? And Dean's like, did you find anything? He's like, no, but I am gonna hurl. And you're like, this is quite realistic. And then he's like, I'm gonna hurl. And then he's like, wait, I saw something. And he reaches back into the dead person's mouth. It's so gross. And he sees there's a hole in the girl's gums. And Dean like presses on it. Here we getting some lore, and a fang comes out, like a vampire fang. And he's like, oh, retractable set of vampire fangs. You gotta be kidding me. And Sam's like, all right, this changes things. And Dean's like, you think? Like, clearly it was a case, obviously. And so yeah, we now get some lore about apparently the fangs are retractable, which I guess we've seen before when we've seen vampires, but we haven't seen a lot of vampires before. So then they cut to a local bar, and Sam and Dean, they go up to the counter, they order some beers, they want to do some information hunting, and Sam goes to the bartender, we're looking for someone, and I'm like, again, that's suspicious of you. And the bartender's like, yeah, so is everybody else, like,
the bartender played by Ty Olsson.
Yes, so the bartender is played by Ty Olsson. And they hand him some money to like bribe him, and they're like, okay, but we're like looking for someone. He's like, okay, well, there are these people, they moved here like 6 months ago, but I don't know, out in this barn, and we don't really know much else, and they sleep all day and they party all night. And then there's this man in a corner. He's sitting at a table and he's watching Sam and Dean. The bartender is like, I've seen some of those people. They're kind of noisy drinkers. They come in like every once in a while. And Dean and Sam are like, okay, thanks. And when they turn around and they start to leave, the man in the corner is gone. The man in the corner is Sterling K. Brown. So they're outside of the bar. And they walk out behind the bar, and we see that man, Sterling K. Brown, follow them. And he goes around the back of the bar, but they're gone. And then he turns around, and he's like, I feel like I am being followed. And then Dean and Sam fucking jump him behind the bar, and put a knife to his throat. I'm like, Dean? What the actual fuck? I understand you guys are hunters, but this monster, you think it is a monster, was not trying to attack you. What the hell?
And also, they have no reason to not think that he is just some guy who's acting a little weird. Y'all are so lucky that you have good intuition, because if you didn't, like, you guys
borderline almost committed a hate crime. What's up with that? It is not looking good. And so they're like, show us your teeth. And he's like, I am not a vampire. I heard you talking inside. I know how to kill vampires. Get this fucking thing off of my neck. Fucking chill. And they don't move. And he's like, here's my teeth. Like, and then they finally let him go. And then he's like, who are you people? And he's like a bit calm. He's like weirdly calm. For a man who has just been jumped out accidentally. And they're like, we're Sam and Dean Winchester. And he's like, oh, my name is Gordon. And he, of course, they go back to his car, and he also has kind of a classic car. And instead of having the weapons in the trunk, he has like a rack that he pulls out with all kinds of hunting weapons. And he's like, oh, I know your dad. I met him once. He was very Austin Slay. I didn't say Austin Slay, but basically.
Red flag, being like, I met John Winchester. He was awesome. Every other hunter who has met John Winchester is like, that bitch was so fucking annoying. It's insane.
They were like, yeah, we really didn't like hanging out with him. And Gordon's like, I thought he was kind of a great guy.
And you know what? I respect that. He said, you know what? No one is going to bat for my homeboy, John Winchester, who I met once.
Yeah. Like, Gordon
seems like he needs a friend.
Yeah. I mean, and he did. He did. And he was like, oh, he was a really great hunter. I heard he passed. I'm really sorry. And this part is the part that makes me laugh, because they're like, how do you know so much about our family? And he's like, word travels fast. Hunters talk. And Dean's like, they what? And he's like, okay, so your dad has clearly never not told you much. Which we have another instance of basically like their dad being a fucking loner being hilarious, because literally every other hunter knows each other, and it's just John and his poor. And this is also why the Winchesters get their ass kicked so much in early seasons, because they're not like sharing information with anybody else. They're like learning their own shit on the fly. This show would have been a lot shorter if their dad had just talked to people. Which the Winchesters show is gonna make more complicated, isn't it?
Don't bring her up here. I can't think about her right now.
Okay. Anyways, so yeah, Gordon's like, oh my god. Gordon is like, oh, you guys were homeschooled?
No, literally. He's like, oh, okay. Interesting. It shows.
He's like, oh, you guys are like those kids that weren't allowed to watch SpongeBob. And he's like, Sam's like, okay, so those two vampires that were killed, did you do that? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, okay, where's the nest? Like, we'll go help. And he's like, I don't need your help. I have this covered. I've been tracking them for a bit. Like, I'm good, but thank you for the help. And he's like, I've been here for 2 weeks. I found a vampire in Austin. I tracked it all the way here. I found the nest. Like, I can do this myself. And Dean is like, we can help, whatever. And he's like, I'm a kind of a do it alone kind of guy. So, and Dean's like, oh, I've been kind of like itching for a hunt. And Gordon's like, no.
Gordon's like, you will not be helping me.
He's like, there's a chupacabra 2 states over. He doesn't tell him where. He's just like 2 states over. And he gets in his car and he's like, it was really nice meeting you guys. I'll buy you a drink on the flip side. See you guys later. Bye. And Dean and Sam are like, what the fuck? So it cuts to, apparently this is a mill. It looks like some industrial place. Really, doesn't really feel like a mill to me. But there's this man sitting inside the mill. It seems kind of like he's doing security of some kind, something like that. He's on watch of some kind. He gets up because he hears something, and he walks outside, and he like looks around, and suddenly Gordon is behind him, and they start to fight, and you realize this guy is a vampire, and Gordon is coming to get his ass. His teeth come out, and Gordon is like completely overpowered by this guy, and this is the part where I'm like, so apparently outside the mill, there's just like this freestanding, really tall saw. And I'm like, the OSHA violation.
It's like a table saw. Like, it's just this, like, but it's not. It's just, like, free. It's just there.
And if it was, like, an abandoned mill, why would the saw still work?
I don't think it was abandoned. Like, he looked like he was there at work.
But if it's not abandoned, then they are not passing OSHA regulations. The OSHA, like, it's just like in Star Wars when there's no fucking railings on anything. It's like, and you built it like this, and also you are vampires that are living here, and you can be killed by your head being cut off, and you have a fucking freestanding table saw. You people are stupid.
Okay, I mean, to be fair, I'm a human being, and I would probably get killed if my head got cut off. So I think, regardless of the fact that they're vampires, a freestanding table saw is just a little dangerous. Just out, like no one's
Wouldn't
using
you
it. No
unplug
safety.
it?
Literally, or like, I'm not a construction worker. I don't work at a mill. I wouldn't know, but I feel like that seems like something you would do.
I have many questions about why this random saw was here outside. I have questions. Anyways, so the vampire, he basically pushes Gordon underneath the fucking saw, and he's like about to literally chop him down. And as he's about to do it, like Sam and Dean save Gordon. They obviously have followed him there, and they pull him out from under the saw, and Sam and Dean start attacking the vampire, and he stabs it in the chest. Dean stabs it in the chest. And then he brings the saw down on the vampire's neck, and Gordon's like, all right, so I guess I gotta buy you a drink. Thank you very much. So they're back at the bar. Sam and Dean and Gordon, they're all vibing. Dean and Gordon are drinking. Sam is just kind of sitting there, not vibing. And Gordon is like, congrats on you really slayed. Literally, like, congrats on such a slay. He was like a clean cut. You got him there.
Gordon really does kind of turn around. Like, he really does see this, and he's like, you know what? Actually, maybe I do respect you guys.
Yeah, and he's like, that was such a slay.
Like, Gordon is having very bestie vibes right now.
Yeah, Gordon and Dean, and Dean's like, oh, thank you. And Sam is clearly like, he's not loving this, and he's like, Sam, are you okay? And Sam's like, I'm fine. And then Gordon says, have another one, Sammy. And Sam's like, only Dean's allowed to call me that. And you're like, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, I do feel like, here's the thing. Sam, like, I think that he's just kind of getting a vibe. Like, he's just like, oh, I don't like the vibe. He's not like he's not really like a guy's guy. Like, he doesn't, it's established that Sam doesn't like the guy talk. But, like, Sam really is just being a bitch for no reason, right?
Yeah, I'm like, Sam, you're being an asshole. And he's like, sorry, I didn't mean any offense. I'm just celebrating. And Sam's like, well, he's like, yeah. And Sam's like, well, decapitations aren't really my idea of a good time. And Gordon's like, well, it's not as if it was a human. And he's like, you know, you gotta have some fun on the job, and you know?
Also, to be fair to Gordon, the vampire, Gordon can hunt out this vampire, but this vampire was about to cut his head off.
Yeah.
So then they saved him, so now he's like, wow, I'm so happy to be alive, and Sam's like, I don't like decapitation.
I was like, so something that they really don't address in this episode, but they do in later episodes, is that Sam is coming to terms with the fact that he has, like, psychic powers, and so when they do things that are not Yas and Slay to monsters, he's like, but I'm a monster. Wait a minute. They address that quite a lot later on.
Sam is a little monster, like Lady Gaga fan.
Yeah,
anyway.
I think he turns on Lady Gaga and it pisses off Dean in the Impala.
Dean's just pissed off because how much he enjoys it.
Yeah. Dean being a little monster, that's so powerful. And so Dean's like, I've been trying to tell Sammy, like, you know, that you gotta have some fun on the job, and he's like, we could learn some things from Gordon. And Sam's like, yeah, I bet I could. He's like being an asshole. And he's like, I'm going back to the motel. And Dean's like, here's the keys. And Gordon is like, did I say something? And Dean's like, Sam's just like that. And you're like, damn, asshole.
He's like, Sam is just kind of a little bitch sometimes. And it's fine.
Yeah. So we cut to the motel. Sam goes in. It zooms in on this, like, key holder in the motel, and Sam puts his keys on there. And then we cut back to the bar, and we see Dean. He's telling Gordon something. He's like, oh man, so I killed this thing when I was 16, and he's describing it, blah blah blah. And he's like, oh yeah, I did it in the heart, etc etc. And he basically starts describing, like, when they went and they burned the monster that they killed or whatever, how he had this moment when he was 16. And again, this is another moment where you're like, Dean. where he's like, I'm 16 years old. Kids my age are worried about pimples, prom dates. I'm seeing things they'll never even know and never even dream of. And I guess that's when I sort of, and then Gordon's like, embrace the life. And you're like, oh, I can see why gay people really like this. I can. You're like, oh.
Yeah. He said, you're different. You and I aren't that different.
I know what you are.
I know what you are, Dean Winchester.
And
okay, AU, where in this episode where everything is the same, but the bar they're going to isn't just like a dive bar. It's a gay bar. That's every bar in Supernatural if you squint.
Yeah. It's just a Midwestern gay bar. And so Dean's like, oh, well, how did you get started? And Gordon tells this really fucked up story where he's like, I saw my first vampire. I was 18. I was home alone with my sister. It came into her room. I went and I got my dad's gun and I ran in and I tried to like get it off of her, and like, you know, shooting it doesn't do jack shit. So it flung me across the room and knocked me out. And when I woke up, the vampire was gone and my sister was gone. And how do you explain that to your family? So I left home and I started hunting it, and I looked for information and I like became a hunter, and like that's kind of where I've been. And he's like, I found the vampire eventually, and it was my first kill. And Dean's like, I'm really sorry about your sister. And Gordon says, it was a long time ago. And he says, I really miss the way that she was. Can remember that one for later. And then he says, like, but your dad, like, it's got to be really rough that you lost your dad. And Dean goes, yeah, he was one of those guys, took some terrible beatings, but he never gave up. So you're always saying to yourself, he's indestructible. He'll always be around. Nothing can kill my dad. And then just like that, he's gone. And then he looks straight at Gordon and he's like, so I can't say this to Sam because I have to like keep my game face on or whatever. But the truth is, I am not handling this well. And I have this, and then Gordon's like, you have this hole inside of you of grief, basically. And he's like, yeah, and it just gets bigger and bigger and darker and darker. And then Gordon kind of looks at him in a really fucked up kind of way, and he's like, good, you can use it. Trust me. He's like, there's plenty out there that needs killing, and this is going to help you do it. And he's like, Dean, it's not a crime to need your job. And you're like, this seems like a little bit toxic advice.
Yeah, this is he's fostering a toxic workplace environment. Capitalism has corrupted Gordon.
Yeah. And but the thing is, like, you have this moment of like, oh, Dean, already the whole thing with Supernatural is that it's like, oh, it's supposed to be these macho men, but like every time they get in the car they talk about their feelings, and they talk about how they're like, I'm a macho man and I don't talk about my feelings, and then they talk about their feelings. And then in this episode he's like, I can't talk about my feelings, so I'm going to talk about directly my feelings with you, a stranger.
Which is, okay, this is something I will say about Dean Winchester that I think is really, like, really interesting, is I feel like I'm hesitant to say that he's, like, emotionally mature. Like, I don't think that he has the best coping mechanisms, but that being said, he's really good at diagnosing what he and the people around him are feeling. At the very least, he can say, here's what I'm feeling and here's why I'm feeling it. I'm still feeling it, and I'm not really doing anything to not feel that way.
Older sibling syndrome, unfortunately.
Exactly. He said, I know exactly what's causing it, and I know exactly what I'm feeling, but I'm not going to do anything to fix it because I don't know what to do. And I'm not going to ask for help, even though I am going to ask for help. But if someone tries to help me, I'm going to tell them no, even though I asked for help.
Yeah, he's a bit toxic.
The girlies, Dean Winchester, it's just... Every time he meets someone new, I'm like, the way that this man would benefit from some sort of counseling is so crazy to me. Like, he literally just, he is the epitome of having, like, parental issues. Like, he literally just needs an authority figure to be like, hey, buddy, let's work through it. And he'd be fine. I'm telling you.
And in this episode, we'll get to that later, but in this episode, that's kind of what happens, but in a bad way. And what happens here is him being like, I need some help, and then someone being like, I can make you worse. Here is where we start with a bit of the, well, we had a problematic part earlier in the episode, but a bit of the problematic themes in the episode of, here we have two people who are very similar in their grief and in their profession and in their whatever. But we have one person who is the worst one. And I wonder what race they are. But we'll get to that.
Mm-hmm.
So we cut back to the motel, and Sam calls up Ellen. Because, finally, we're communicating with other hunters.
Yeah. And he said, I need to call a strong woman.
He's like,
I need the help of a woman.
He's like, Mom, I'm scared. Can you come pick me up? Oh my God, he decided to call up an area white woman. No, Sam.
And you know what? In this one case,
yeah,
that was a good choice.
Yeah, he could have called Bobby.
Yeah, but Ellen is Ellen, and she's Slay.
Yeah, so he calls her, and she's like, oh my God, it's so good to hear from you. You're like, oh, and she's like, is everything okay? And he's like, yeah, everything's fine. We met this other hunter. His name's Gordon Walker, and he's like, do you know her? And she's like, oh yeah, he's a really good hunter. And she's like, why are you asking? And he's like, we ran into him on a job. Like, we're kind of working together on this case. And she like immediately turns around. She's like, do not do that. Gordon is dangerous to everyone and everything around him. You need to, if he is doing this job, you need to just let him handle it and move on. And Sam's like, you just told me he was a good hunter. I don't understand. And she's like, he is. But you should not associate it with him. Because there's clearly something wrong with him. And you're like, girl, what?
I just think it's funny that one of the first, like, prominent black characters that we see who knows what's up, like a hunter.
Yeah, I was not
is
like
all of the other hunters are like, I'm like, guys, like, and again, I will say, like, later in the episode, we see that Ellen was correct in being like, hey, just be cautious around him. But I think it's funny, and it's a symptom of the time where it's like the only black characters that you have are like either some sort of like quote unquote extremist where they're set in their values and aren't like, they don't get the sympathy that a lot of other characters will get who are in similar situations. But again, we can talk about this once we diagnose once we get into it a little more.
Yeah. So again, this is
foreshadowing.
So this is like red flag number 70 about Gordon. And Sam's like, So we cut back to the bar, and Gordon and Dean, they're still talking. And Gordon says, I love this life because it's really black and white. There's no maybe. He goes, you find the bad thing and you kill it. And he says, most people, they live their lives in like these shades of gray, but like we don't, you know what I mean? And Dean's like, well, I don't know if like Sam would agree with you. And Gordon's like, that's fine. He can think what he thinks, but I don't think Sam is like you and I. And he's like, I'm not saying he's wrong. He's just different. I'm like, oh wow. There's a lot of coding going on here, but we'll get to that. And he's like, but you and me, we were born to do this. It's in our blood. This line is very funny to me, considering some of the shit that happens later on that was not planned, like the Men of Letters shit, and the and like all that kind of shit. I'm like, oh yeah, technically it kind of was. It's just it's funny when Supernatural does that, and Dean kind of looks like, I don't know about that. And so we cut back to the outside of the motel. Sam's like getting himself a soda. He hears something in the bushes, and he goes back into the motel, and he's like, okay, that's fine. Like, I just got spooked or whatever. And he puts down his drink, and suddenly there is someone like attacking him from behind, and he's like, he's getting one over on this person. But then they hit him over the head with a phone.
Yeah, but you got to keep in mind, this was 2007, I think. Phones were chunky back then.
Yeah. And he gets knocked out, and it cuts to, we are in the vampire's nest, and Sam wakes up with a bag over his head. He's tied up. He's gagged. The bag is pulled off, and he recognizes the bartender, Ty Olsson, from the bar, and whose fangs immediately come out. So the bartender was a vampire. You know what? That sounds like what were those books called when you were a kid? The like, my teachers or whatever, or you know what I'm talking about?
My Bart don't like. Yeah, I know exactly. Like Bart, like vampires don't do XYZ. Vampires don't tend bars.
It's literally that. And then there's basically his fangs come out. He like starts to like come at Sam, and then there's this woman's voice in the back, and she's like, "Wait." And he pulls back, and there's this woman standing in the doorway, and she comes over and she like takes the gag off of Sam, and she's like, "Hi, my name's Lenore. I'm not gonna hurt you. I just want to talk to you."
Played by Amber Benson, my best friend.
Shout out to the Buffy stance. There's a lot of people in this episode. And Sam's like, sorry, I can't really pay attention because Eli, who's the name of the bartender, vampire, he's like, Eli's teeth are out. Like, put those damn things away. And she's like, he's not gonna hurt you. Like, you have my word. And Sam's like, and why should I believe you? And you're not the first vampire I have met. And she's like, well, we're not like other girls. And she's like, we don't kill humans. We don't drink their blood. We haven't for a long time. Sam's like, are you fucking kidding me? And she's like, okay, you're still alive. So think on that for a second. And she's like, we found other ways to eat. We eat cattle blood. It's fucking disgusting, but like, we get by. And, you know, if there's no missing locals and there's no reason for fucking idiots like you and hunters to come looking for us. And Eli, the bartender, starts to get really mad. And he's like, they murdered Conrad, who's clearly the guy from the mill, the vampire from the mill. And he's like, and they're celebrating. They're like out at a bar celebrating. And he's pissed. And she's like, okay, that's enough. Like, what's done is done. Like, we can't do anything about that. And Sam's like, why are you talking to me? And she's like, well, I'd rather not, but I know how hunters work. So as soon as they find one of us, they're going to keep hunting us down. And she's like, you know, we have a right to live. We're not hurting anybody. And Sam's like, again, why should I believe you? And she's like, well, because I'm going to let you go to relay this message. And Sam's like, what? And then they take him out of the house blindfolded and they drive him back to the motel. So we cut back to the motel, and Dean and Gordon, they are back at the motel. They're in Dean and Sam's room. They're looking at a map. Gordon is showing him where he thinks the vampire nest is. And Dean is like checking his watch, and he's like, where's Sam? And Gordon's like, he probably went out for a walk.
He seems like the walking type. He seems like the type who goes for walks.
I know what you are.
He's a little silly boy who likes to think and walk.
Yeah. And Dean's like, yeah, that tracks. and then suddenly Sam
Wait. Walker. Because he's in the CW show Walker.
Oh my god, and his name is Gordon Walker.
Oh.
We connected the dots.
They've been planning this. CW, you crazy son of a bitch. I knew you had it in you.
Oh god. Anyways, so Sam walks in the door and Dean's like, where you been, bitch? And Sam's like, I gotta talk to you outside.
I'm sorry. Where you been, bitch?
They're outside the motel, and Sam's like, we have to rethink this hunt. And Dean's like, what the fuck? And he's like, I was at the nest. And Dean's like, okay, well, how many of them did you kill? And he's like, none of them. And he's like, well, they didn't just let you go. And he's like, actually, that's exactly what they did. And it's very funny how he says it. And then he's like, and Dean's like, okay, do you know where the nest is? And he's like, I don't know where it is. I was blindfolded. He's like, we went over this bridge outside of town. That's all I really know. And he's like, I don't think they're like other vampires. He's like, they're the ones doing the cattle mutilations. That's how they survive. And he's like, I don't believe you. And he's like, we still have to find them and kill them. And Sam's like, no. And it cuts to Gordon is standing just outside the door and he's listening to them, but they don't see him. And Dean's like, Dean says, if it's supernatural, we kill it. That's our job. And Sam's like, no, our job is hunting evil. And you're like, oh, thesis of the show.
The girls are fighting about their job description.
Yeah, the girls are fighting in their performance review. And he basically goes, our job is hunting evil, and these things aren't evil. And you're like, damn, okay, all right, this show, all right. I'll give you props for that. And Dean's like, Gordon has been on these vampires for like a year. And Sam's like, hey, so I actually called Ellen and she said to stay the fuck away from Gordon. He's actually bad news. And Dean's like, I'm not listening to Ellen. We barely know her. And Sam's like, okay. And Gordon, you don't know him that much either. Check in mate, bitch. And then, of course, they get into daddy issues. Because Sam's like, you don't think I know what this is? And he's like, what the fuck are you talking about? And he's like, he's a substitute for dad. And he goes, a poor one. And Dean's like, fuck you. And he starts to walk away. And he's like, you know, you slap on this big fake smile, but I can see through it because I know how you feel, Dean. Dad's dead and he left a hole and it hurts so bad you can't take it, but you can't just fill up that hole with whoever you want. It's an insult to his memory, which is crazy because, as we know, Sam did not have a good relationship with his father. And Dean's like turns away and then he turns around and he punches Sam in the face. Clearly he is not handling this well. And Sam's like, you can beat the shit out of me, but, you know, it's not going to change anything. And Dean's like, I'm going to the nest. I'm going to fight it myself. Fuck you. So clearly that's exactly what Dean was doing. He needed someone like his father to tell him what to do. I'm like, sir, you need therapy. He doesn't like being called on his shit.
Yeah, and the choice to have him be like, no, fuck you, Sam, and punch him in the face.
This is not the first time he's done this.
I know, but still, it's still so dark.
I'm like, sir, can you stop, please? So they go back into the motel, and they find that the keys to Dean's car and Gordon are gone. And they go outside, and the Impala is still there, so they hotwire the car. And, of course, Dean is like, I just fixed this, fuck. And Sam clearly does know a little bit more about where the nest is than he initially let on, because he's like, okay, the bridge was 4.5 miles from their farm and he knows all the directions even though he was blindfolded. And Dean's like, okay, you're good, you're a pain in the ass, but like you're slaying. So finally we cut to the nest and Lenore, the female vampire, she's packing. Eli, the bartender vampire, is like, we have to stay and fight. Like, it's dog eat dog out here. Like, they're just gonna keep trying to kill us. And she's like, no, there's gonna be more where, even if we kill them, there's gonna be more of them where they come from, and I'm not gonna give up hope. And she says, if we can change, then the hunters can change. And she's like, go get the others in town, we'll leave before sunrise. And you're
no, because
like,
Lenore is a girl boss. She said I am a matriarch.
Yeah, I love her.
I love her too. She is. I want Lenore. Call me, please. We can hang.
So sorry, Queen. So we cut back to the road, and Gordon is driving to the nest, and Sam and Dean are very close behind him. And they get to the outside of the nest, and we see Lenore. She's packing the trunk. She hears something. She looks around. Gordon is behind her, and he stabs her in the chest with a knife. And he's like, "Dead man's blood. I gotcha."
Yeah, and he calls her a bitch.
They do that a bunch when there's especially like a female monster and you're like, okay, pack it up, 2005.
I think sometimes I just like forget, and this has nothing to do with Gordon. It's just that like sometimes I forget that people were just calling women bitches all the time. But I also think like I do fear that the choice to have him say that, to call her that, was very intentional to make you not like Gordon.
Yeah.
Which is like fair again. Like,
also, the optics there, considering that she's a white woman, lot to unpack.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it once we get through the.
This episode does get more and more uncomfortable. There's so many things that are yas and slay, and there's some things that are not yes slay. So we cut back to the nest. The nest is a house basically, and we are inside. Gordon has tied Lenore, the vampire, up. And he's, like, cutting into her with this knife covered with dead man's blood. Basically, dead man's blood is kind of like narcotics to vampires, and it kind of knocks them out. So she's kind of, like, fucked up and, like, out of it. She's not dead. And Sam and Dean come in, and Gordon's like, oh, I'm about to get Lenore to tell me where the rest of them are. Can you help me out? Just, like, grab a knife. And Dean's like, maybe we should chill for a second. And Sam's like, can you put the knife down? And Gordon's like, maybe it's you who needs to chill to Sam. And Sam's like, you need to stop. And Gordon's like, you know what? Sam's right. I'm wasting my time. She's never going to give up the location of the rest of her nest. I'm just going to put her out of her misery, going to make it a clean thing, make it humane. Pulls out a really long knife, and Sam comes forward, and he points the knife at Sam, and Dean's like, okay, stop. Like, hold on a second. And then Dean says, hey, the vampire that killed your sister deserved to die. And Gordon's like, actually, Dean, the vampire didn't kill my sister. He turned her, and then I hunted her down, and I killed her. And Dean's like, what the fuck? And Sam's like, oh, so you knew all along that these vampires weren't killing anyone. And Gordon's like, yeah. And, they don't change. They're monsters. I can prove it. And he grabs Sam's arm, cuts into it, and holds it over the vampire who's kind of knocked out's head. And Dean, aims a gun at Gordon. And he's like, I'm not going to kill Sam. I'm just going to prove a point to you. And the blood drips onto her, and her fangs come out, and she's screaming, crying, throwing up. And Gordon's like, yeah, they're all the same. They're evil. They're bloodthirsty. They can't change. And then Lenore retracts her fangs, and she's like, no, I'm not. I won't do it. Whatever. And Sam, he pushes. Sam, who's standing there with his arm fucking out, he pushes Gordon away, and he's like, do you hear her? And he unties her, and he takes her out. He saves the vampire. And Dean is like, Gordon, I think we have some shit that we have to talk about. And Dean's like, if you want to get these vampires, you have to go through me. And Gordon puts down his knife, and Dean puts down the gun, and they start fucking tussling, basically.
Well, it's really funny because Dean unloads the cartridge from his gun, and it almost looks like it for a split second it looks like Dean's like, okay guys, okay dude, we're just gonna talk, and he puts his gun away, and then Gordon's like, actually, I'm gonna beat your ass.
He's like, let's fucking tussle. And Gordon basically grabs his knife again, and he comes at Dean, and he knocks out of his hand, and Gordon's like, you are not like your brother. You are a killer, just like me. And they're still fighting, and Dean finally gets the upper hand, and he ties Gordon to a chair, basically. And he's like, I might be like you, and I might not, but you're the one who's tied up right now. And you're like, Dean, you have some shit to unpack. It cuts to the morning, and Sam comes back in. Dean is still standing there with Gordon. I don't know what happened there. And Sam's like, did I miss anything?
He just sat there and stared at him tied up for 6 hours.
Yeah. Sam's like, did I miss anything? And Dean's like, nothing much, bitch. And he's like, I'm going to call someone in a couple days to come and untie you. And Sam's like, okay, are you ready to go? And he's like, not yet. And he punches Gordon one more time, and then he says he's ready to go. And you're like,
no, was that necessary, Dean Winchester? He was tied necessary.
Up. It wasn't necessary, and it was not slay.
No, and also, I'm sorry. I know I'm just reading too much into it, but if you punch him in the face, and he gets a nosebleed, and now he's lying on his back, Dean Winchester, that man is going to pass away.
I fear the morality in this episode is truly off the shits. It is not. It's.
There's some issues.
It's very bad. So they cut to outside the nest. The boys are leaving. Dean is like, all right, Sam, hit me. And Sam's like, what? You look like you just went 12 rounds with a block of cement. And he's like, I'll take a rain check. I'm not going to beat the shit out of you. And Dean's like, and then they get to the car, and Dean's like, I wish we never took this job. And Sam's like, they have this fucking come to Jesus moment, and they're like, this scene reminds me a lot of in season 1 when they have the episode about do all these things exist just because we believe in them? How many of the things have we killed that are just like this?
That's exactly what I was thinking. The one with the fucked up house and the the ghost facers.
Yeah. And he's basically like, how many things that we've killed maybe didn't deserve it? And he's like, the way that Dad raised us, he raised us to hate them. And Sam's like, well, after mom died, like dad, he like did the best he could. And he's like, Dean, and then Dean's like, yeah, but like our dad was not perfect. And he's like, he raised us to hate them, and I do hate them, but when I killed that vampire at the mill, like I didn't think about it. I kind of enjoyed it. And then Sam's like, well, you didn't kill Lenore. And he's like, yeah, but I wanted to, and I was going to kill her, and I was going to kill them all. And he's like, and you didn't, and that's what matters. And he's like, okay. And I didn't kill them because you're a pain in the ass. And Sam's like, I have to stick around and be a pain in the ass. And they get in the car, and and Dean says, thank you. And he's like, don't. And Sam's like, don't mention it. And he looks back at the house for like a few seconds, obviously where Gordon is inside. And then he gets in the car and they drive away. And it's somber. You're like, holy shit.
It's hard because I really, really like, this is an episode where it's like the things that I really like, I really, really like. Like, I adore this scene of them having this conversation because I think, like, Dean really is, like, I'm just having a moment where I'm realizing that, like, I'm talking shit about him, but we are not better than him. Like, we are suffering.
Yeah.
But it's also, like, here's the thing where I get my issue from this episode. I think that the point is to say, like, Gordon is helping spur on their realization that maybe not all monsters need to be killed. And maybe not all monsters are monsters. And they're like, okay, cool. And Gordon also serves as like this is what happens when you go too far. And I think that it's a very interesting thing that we can dissect in media is the fact that so many characters that we see that are like, oh, they went too far with something that initially started out as being good. Because it's like you say, like Sam and Dean, the whole first season, stopping monsters regardless of what they're doing. He is stopping monsters regardless of what they're doing. He's doing the same thing that they were doing, the same thing that John was doing. And I know we've said, like, John's not necessarily the best person, but we're granting John Winchester a lot more, like, grace with saying, like, oh, well, he was doing the best he could. Whereas with Gordon, it's like, oh, he is a bad person. And I think it's funny that characters who are like that a lot of the times are played by Black men. And I think that that's a really interesting thing that we need to dissect as a culture, as to, like, why are we so accustomed to seeing Black men as the characters who took it too far, or who are like, they may have had an upright cause, they may have been upright and moral at the beginning, but they've spiraled down and have become too overzealous. Like,
or at least as, like, non-white people, because like, the biggest comparison here is Saw Gerrera in Star Wars, and, like, people are always like, oh, but he did bad things, and you're like, yes, why was he written that way to do those things?
Exactly.
They were like, they wrote that character to teach the rest of the characters a lesson. Like in Star Wars, we have Saw Gerrera, and he's supposed to be a part of this group of the partisans, and they're supposed to be like the rebels that took it too far. And you're like, the rebels are an armed, militarized rebellion that, like, kills people left and right. And somehow there's ones who are worse, and you want to, like, and you made up a whole character who happens to be a person of color, especially a Black man, to, like, consistently be brought back in the story to be like, well, they're not that bad. And then
it's almost like to say, like, oh, well, look, our protagonists aren't as bad as those guys. So when people are like, oh, well, it's like, I think in the context of Supernatural being like, oh, well, maybe the hunters are bad. It's like, well, no, people like Gordon are bad, but people like Sam and Dean, they're learning.
Yeah. And again, and it's not just Black male character. It does happen. Other big examples would be in Avatar and Legend of Korra. A Jet is a big one where they're like, oh, he's a freedom fighter, but he murdered people. And you're like, and why was that necessary?
And again, it's not even that the character's actions are justified, because they're not. And I think it is like a good thing, but it's like, why were they written that way? And why did you make the conscious decision to make this person who is clearly written as a man of color to be this way?
Yeah.
And I think, like, that is just something that happens a lot. And honestly, also the fact that it is not lost on us that every other named character, and every other character I think in this episode is white.
Yeah.
Like, all of the vampires are white. The main vampire, Lenore, I love her to death. She is a white woman. So it's like the thing of like, oh, look, he's attacking this white woman. And again, it's not the point, but it does, like, it's not really what the point of the episode is. I don't think that that's, like,
well, it's about
the intention, but it does show, like, there's a certain racial politics that are happening there that are not good.
Well, it's always about, it's not about intent. It's about
it's
how
the optics. And it's how it actually affects it.
Yeah. And it's very, like, and if we lived in a society where we had media, or in this specific case in Supernatural, where we just had more people of color and specifically had more black characters or recurring black characters, then, them having a black actor play this kind of character might not be as bad. I still think it would be bad considering all of the racialized history and all that kind of stuff, but, like, it might not be as bad, but it's like, oh, of course, really? Come on. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I also think specifically about this episode, considering they were comparing him to their father, and there's a lot of white male masculinity is a big thing in the show, blah, blah, blah. I think that the message also would have been more powerful if they had had a white male character, especially one who was, like, older, kind of like their dad, so that he was just like them. Like,
yeah.
Because, and this is very typical of, like race blind rather than race conscious casting as well, when they're like, well, they are the same because, they're both hunters. I'm like, well, they're not. He is a black man living in America and his sister, who is presumably also a black woman, was like, they're not the same. And, treating them as not the same is not okay either metatextually or in the text either. And I do feel like if the point they wanted to make was, hey, maybe we are the baddies. Maybe we have to rethink this, adding the piece of some very complicated racial politics to this. It's like, and you can cast, like, anybody else. It's race blind versus race conscious. Doctor Who fucks this up all the time too, and you're like, oh, Jesus.
And it is also just the fact that I think that, like, he is the first black man, like, that is really prominent in this show that I can remember. Like, and it's just funny that that's the first.
We've had guest characters and, like, one-off kind of things, and spoiler alert, he is a recurring character, and he is someone who, like, they're not just, like, meeting in a town. He, like, has a connection to them.
And he continues to have an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's rough, and I think, like, it's definitely not, like, the worst that it could have ever been. Like, it's not. I remiss to say it's not, like, the bar is in the ground, but it's not great. But what I said, what sucks is that, like, there are a lot of really good parts of this episode too.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is not a bad episode. It's just something that I think that we need to take the time as content viewers, to say, like, okay, guys, like, let's examine this. And again, no one's saying, like, go back and edit the episode or whatever. This is not, like, a reactionary, like, oh, like, no, it's just saying, like, we need to be critical when we watch this kind of stuff, even though it is from almost 20 years ago now. No, it's like 15 years ago, but, like,
unfortunately, also, it is an endemic problem in Supernatural. Like, we can't even say, like, oh, this is of the time either.
Yeah, it doesn't get better.
It doesn't get better. Like, I keep thinking of one of Michael's vessels.
Yeah.
Later on, the Angel Michael. He has many vessels. The one time he has a black male vessel. I don't know if there's multiple versions, but he is often depicted in a, like, he's extreme. He's the extreme angel versus Castiel, who is
the moderate.
Yeah.
He's the capital L liberal angel.
Yeah, it's not
Castiel
good.
is the libertarian angel.
Castiel, no! Don't go down the alt-right pipeline. Anyway, we can't talk about that. But yeah, I did want to say, like, we do want to call it out every single time because, unfortunately, it does not get any better. It actually gets, one could say, worse, considering they have more recurring characters and they do start to cast more diversely, but extremely race blind, and you're like, Jesus Christ, it does keep happening. But yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot of Yas and Slay other things that are happening. Also, Sterling K. Brown, like, he killed the performance.
He always does. What else is new?
Yeah. They also cast him as a weird murderer in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I don't know.
Sterling K. Brown does keep getting typecast as just like a messed up guy, which is funny because I'm like the only character that I can think of off the top of my head, like that's like a prominent, like well-known character of his, is in This Is Us. Like,
and Kipo, obviously.
Yeah, but where he isn't like a super messed up guy. And I don't know if you guys have watched a lot of This Is Us, but I've only seen season 1. But Randall is kind of like a messed up guy, but just in a different way. He's just like emotionally messed up.
Yeah, he's like Dean Winchester.
He's just a lot like Dean Winchester.
He's fucked up in the head rather than like being a murderer.
Yeah, like he's not a bad person. He's just got issues. He's like if Dean Winchester ran for office.
Oh, that's terrifying. Anyways, Sterling K. Brown, we love you, okay?
Yeah.
I'm sorry you had to be on Supernatural for a bit part. Ooh,
yeah.
Jesus.
I'm so sorry. This isn't it. It's not you. It's not your fault. The second episode, season 2, episode 4. It's called Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, which I love a long title. It's giving Fall Out Boy song. But I love a long title. It is always so exciting to me. This episode, I quite enjoy. I think it's off the shits.
As soon as I saw the first frame, I remembered this episode. I was like, oh, this one had such an impact on me.
No, this one is crazy. So we start. Greenville, Illinois. There's a young woman sitting at a table, and she's just like sobbing. She's clearly so upset. And a guy comes up and he's like, hey, listen, best things for a broken heart, some beer and some snacks. And she's like, Neil, you really are the best. Like, thank you so much for this. And he's like, oh, it's all good, Angela. We're good. Like, I'm happy to do this. And she's like, no, I'm all right. I'm okay. Like, I'm gonna be fine. And then they hear someone just pounding on the door. And she's like, oh my God, it's probably Matt. And Neil's like, Neil, the guy who's there with her, is like, don't worry, Angela, I'll take care of it. And he goes and answers the door. And he's like, what do you want, Matt? And Matt's like, is Angela here? I need to talk to her. And he's like, you can't come in. And he's like, I'm gonna come in. And comes in. And I'm like, wow, Neil, first of all, you didn't stop him. Like, you're a freak. Anyway. But Neil is shown to be like her friend. So she's like crashing at his place. And Matt, who's her boyfriend, comes in and he's like, no, I need to talk to you, Angela. Like, I'm really sorry. And she is like booked it out of the house. Like, when they get into the room, he's like, Angela, I'm sorry. And then she's not there. And he's like, So then we cut to Angela. She's in her car. She's driving like 1,000,000 miles an hour down the road. It's the middle of the night. Her cell phone rings and she's like, oh my God. So she's like messing with her purse, reaching in there, trying to like get her cell phone out. And she's not looking at the road at all.
Her cell phone is a Razor. I just want everybody to know this is 2007.
Yes.
The phone all the girlies wanted when I was in middle school. In 2007.
I had a Razor too. That was my first phone.
I never had a Razor. I had a little sidekick. Anyways, I knew how to use my not to use my Razor when I was driving. So
yeah, very true. Angela, come on, girl.
Angela, girl.
I know you're clearly going through something traumatic, but her phone rings. She like goes in her purse and she grabs it, and it's Matt, her boyfriend, and he's like, Angela, I'm so sorry. Like, please, I'm not sorry. And she is like, no, like, oh, you're sorry? You're sorry? Wow, of course you're sorry. I'm like, and she's like having this like very upset moment, and she just swerves off the road and slams into a wall, and the glass like shatters, and the camera pans up and zooms in on the car, and we see her like dead. Her head's like on the steering wheel, and there's blood coming out of like her mouth and like her nose, and it's dripping onto her phone. And Matt is still online. He's like, Angela! And she's not answering because she's dead.
It's very, very graphic and fucked up. I was like, damn, they aired this on network TV. Holy shit.
And then it's like Supernatural. So that's the cold open. And it's funny because this is one of the first cold opens where we don't actually see something like supernatural happen. Like, she just got in a car crash. Like,
I think those are some of the most interesting ones, because a lot of this episode also deals with like, is this really a case, like we were joking about earlier? But it's really interesting when it's like, oh, this cold open, there's nothing that you could think that is supernatural here. It's like, ooh, we got a mystery on our hands.
Truly. So then we cut to the Impala. Sam and Dean are driving, And Dean is like, this is stupid. I don't want to do this. And Sam's like, come on, we're going to go visit Mom's grave because I want to pay my respects. We should pay our respects. And Dean's like, this is ridiculous. She died in the fire. Like, there were no bones to bury. It's just a headstone that was put there by our uncle who we don't even know.
Oh my God, is this the Campbell uncle that they meet later?
I believe so.
The one that will get decanonized?
Oh my God, yeah! This uncle, I think, is going to get decanonized by the Winchesters.
Not the Legendsification, the Mara Jadeification!
But Sam was like, I don't care, like, we should still go. And Dean's like, no, we should pass by the roadhouse and then keep looking for the demon. That's what we should do. We need to be looking for the demon. And Sam is like, okay, fine, I'll drop you off at the roadhouse and then I'll go and we'll meet up in a couple days. And he's like, okay, fine, I'll come with you.
I was like, he literally was like, the prospect of having to sit in this straight bar by myself for too long, no, I can't do it, bestie. I was like,
He literally tells Sam, he's like, I can't, what am I going to do, sit and make awkward small talk? I was like, first of all,
you're neurodivergent, sir.
But he's like, Sam, I can't sit and make small talk for a day while you go to Kansas. I'll die. And I'm also like, he's like, I know Ash is going to be there and I'm not going to be able to contain myself.
He's like, I don't know how to talk to the hot computer guy.
To the computer guy with the mullet. He has
a type. Little nerds.
Yeah.
I swear to, we can't talk about Castiel. We can't.
We have to keep moving. We might have to put a Castiel embargo. Like, we have to put, like, if we only have, like, 4 mentions of him per episode, and then we can't pass that, so we have to be sparing. So the boys go to the cemetery, and they come up to their mother's grave, and it's Mary Winchester. Rest in peace. So Sam...
Rest in pieces, love. Rest in
peace, love. So Sam is at their mother's grave, and he's kind of having this emotional moment, and he takes out his dad's dog tags, like his military tags, and he's like, hi, Mom. I think Dad would want you to have this. And he digs a little hole and buries the tags, like, on top of his mother's grave. And then he's like, I love you, Mom. And it's a very sweet scene.
Oh, especially because, like, Sam didn't really know his mom. So it's very interesting how much he cares about this. I forgot about this. Well,
no, I know.
Considering what happens later, this was crazy.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Dean is just pacing around the cemetery. He's like, no, I am not going near Mom's grave. I'm not doing that.
He's like, I'm dealing with daddy issues right now. I do not have time for mommy issues.
He's like, I can't do both. But he looks over and he's like, whoa, that tree. There's a tree over there that looks really fucked up. And he walks over to it. And there's this area of dead grass. It's like in a perfect circle around this tree. And he's like, oh, that's not right. And he looks over and there's a bunch of, like, dead flowers as well. Like, next to this grave. And he's like, uh-oh, this is unholy ground. This is not correct. And then we see him talking to the Undertaker. And Sam walks up and he's like, hey, Dean, what's going on? And he's like, hey, do you see that fucked up tree over there? This is dead man's ground. And Sam's like, Dean, you can't just, like, ignore Mom's grave. Like, you can't go looking for things that aren't there. Like, you're just trying to avoid talking about it. And Dean's like, no, I'm telling you, like, I just talked to the groundskeeper, and he said that this girl, Angela Mason, was a local college student, and her funeral was 3 days ago. And he says that no one can explain why there's just a perfect circle of grass that is dead. And he said that there's no pesticides, there's nothing. This is a case. And Sam is like, I think it's weird that you would just stumble into something. Like, here, like, you were causing a distraction, you're trying to avoid your feelings. And Dean's like, okay, at the very least, can we just go talk to her father just to see what happened? And Sam's like, okay, fine, I will placate you with this.
Sam is fucking tired of his shit. Keeps going through it.
Yeah, Sam is truly just, like, having a problem. And he's also like, Dean, there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for why there's a perfect circle of dead grass surrounding a tree and a grave of someone who just died. Dean, why are you trying to avoid your feelings? I'm like,
Bestie,
I'm sorry,
what?
Sam Winchester, girl, you are better than this.
Sam, you work with the Supernatural. Like, girly. I think, honestly, Sam was like, probably did think there was something. off, but he was just like, you know what? I've taken, this is my day of PTO.
Yeah. He's like,
Stop.
I'm not doing this. So they go to Dr. Mason's office, the girl's father, and Sam and Dean come in and they're like, oh, we were friends of Angela's. We want to offer our condolences. Like, it's so sad. And they have this conversation, and Dr. Mason is like, she was amazing. Like, she was a great student. She was so kind to everyone, and is basically saying, like, there's no red flags about this girl. Like, she just sounds like a really sweet, kind girl. And Dean is kind of looking on his shelf, and he sees a book that has some, like, Greek symbols on the front, like some ancient Greek symbols. And Dean's like, oh, what's this? And he's like, oh, yeah, it's a book about... Dr. Mason's like, it's a book about Greek mythology. I teach a course on it, so, yeah. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay. And they have a little chat, and then they leave. And they don't really get anything. And Sam's like, I don't know about that. So they go back to the...
They do, when he's talking to the dad, Dean gets a little aggressive, but also a little too personal. He's like, oh, yeah, and it really sucks when someone is gone and you feel it, right? Whatever. And Sam's like, he looks at him, he's like, you're fucking freaking him out. Like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, and that's something really hard to go through anyway. Like, he's like, Dean?
Yeah. Sam is, like, de-escalating the situation, and Dean's like, yeah, it's really hard when someone you know dies. And, like, he's not being super aggressive, but he's definitely being a little bit too invested. Like, it's like, sir, I think enough for Sam to be like, you are projecting. You need to calm down. So they go back to the motel, and Dean is looking through their dad's journal, and he's like, there's something going on. I just haven't figured it out. And, like, something turned that grass into unholy ground. And Sam was like, Dean, you were imagining this hunt, so you don't have to think about mom and dad. Like, you were being crazy. And then Dean grabs he's like, you know what? No, I'm not doing this. He grabs his jacket and his keys, and he, like, storms out.
And he's like, where are you going? He's like, to a bar. And you're like, oh, alcoholism.
Yeah. Like, to a bar. Alone. Then we cut to Matt, Angela's boyfriend's apartment. He's watching, like, a home video of him and Angela, and she's, like, running around, and she's like, ah, ha, ha, ha. And he's, like, in the video, he's like, you're so beautiful. Like, I love you. Oh my God. And it's like this very cute, like, home video that they made. And he's lying on the couch, and he's, like, so upset. He gets up and he gets a beer.
It's very 2007 in that the home videos are, like, clearly recorded on a camcorder in a VHS that can be played on the TV. I mean, granted, we had the internet then, so...
But it wasn't,
Yeah, it's also giving very much, like, in a movie when they'd play, like, a thing about the dead wife.
Yeah.
And you're like, I can't with this.
Yeah. But he gets up to get a beer, and he's sitting down, he's drinking it, and he does not see, but there's a plant in his like, living room, and the plant, like, on this coffee table suddenly starts to wither. And Matt sits back, and he's, like, pauses the video when it comes to, like, a close-up shot of Angela, and he's just looking at her. He's clearly, like, beside himself. And then he sees, like, this reflection in the TV, and it's, like, a girl wearing a white dress. And he's like, oh my God, Angela? And then he turns around, and there's a scream, and blood splatter appears across the television. So...
It's always a woman in a white dress in this fucking show, isn't it?
To be fair, a white and a gray lady, like, those are just ghost hunting 101, baby.
Yeah.
So... Then we cut to Angela's house, where Dean has broken in. He's just...
Sir, you are off the shits in these episodes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he breaks into this house, and he is like, oh my God, I'm gonna find some additional leads. And her roommate is there. And her roommate is like...
She walks out, like, in her pajamas from the bathroom, and she's like, oh my God, there's a fucking man in my house!
Yeah, she's like, she's like, I'm calling the police, get away. Runs into her room, and Dean comes to the door. He's like, no, I'm Angela's cousin. Her dad sent me over to come get her stuff. My name is Alan. And she's like, I don't know about that. I don't know if I trust you. And he's like, look, he gave me the key to your house. And he just, like, has the key. I don't quite remember when he got that, but
I think
it's just a key.
Yeah, I think he just, like, jangles
some keys
that he has.
Yeah, and he's like, no, like, I have the key to your house because Angela's dad gave it to me to come over. He just didn't feel like he could. And she's like, wow, he didn't tell me. And he's like, oh, he said he did. So sorry about that. And he's like, and hey, you know what? You knew Angela in a different way than I did because I'm her cousin and you're like her friend. So can we talk? So they sit down and Angela's roommate, Lindsay, is like, no, she was so nice. Like, she was a great roommate. She was a good friend. And then she starts, like, really getting, like, she's clearly upset that she's just like, yeah, I just miss her. And Dean's like, what about her boyfriend? Matt? Like, were they a happy couple? Like, did they break up or whatever? Are they upset? And she starts getting, like, really upset. Like, she starts crying, and she's like, oh, you didn't hear? And he's like, didn't hear what? And she's like, Matt died last night. He committed suicide by slitting his own throat. And Dean's like, interesting.
Oh, also earlier, he's like, oh, can, like, you tell me more about her, whatever? And she's like, she was just really great. And he's like, anything else? And she's like, no, she was just really great. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, if you're in that situation and someone that you're very close with just dies, and then someone you've never met before is like, can you tell me about her? Like, she was great. What do you want me to say?
Yeah.
So then we get the most unnecessary moment in this show. Dean walks in on Sam, and he's watching like the Skin channel in the motel, and it's playing like Latino porn.
And
you're in the middle of recording. Now I have to say that again. Hold on.
Mel, I think you should keep that. I think you should keep Mel laughing. Okay.
So, and Dean, the door, like, jangles, like, to open, and Sam, like, grabs the remote and just, like, turns it off really fast, and Dean walks in, and he's like, were you just...
He's like, awkward.
Wow, awkward.
Also, Sam was just watching, like normally.
Like, yeah, he's, like, sitting on the edge of the bed fully clothed, just, like, watching porn.
And I just... Because I think this is the only time this is ever mentioned with Sam, because for the rest of the show, it's very much that Dean is the horn dog. Because, spoiler alert, every time they deal with anything involving pornography and these two, it also is very racist.
Oh, yeah,
them.
They are specifically, like, they are seeing an advertisement that's like, busty Asian girls in your area, and they are clicking that with no thought because they're just fucked up.
That's just Dean.
That is just Dean.
Sam,
canonically.
According to this episode, Sam canonically has a thing for Latinas. And then,
great. He's like, I want a spicy Latin.
And you're like, no, Sam!
Sam, stop. You're falling victim to racist tropes.
Sam, no! And then Dean, consistently, for 15 seasons, it is an ongoing joke that he likes busty Asian beauties. And you're like, I'm gonna fucking kill you. And whatever writer thought this was a good idea.
Dean Winchester, maybe you don't deserve rights.
I'm like, Dean, before you enter the LGBT community, I need you to unpack your racism first, asshole.
Oh my god, a racist white gay? That's crazy. I've never heard of that before. Anyway.
So this is just one example of and this is something that we talk about all the time, though, of like when Supernatural will swing wildly from like, okay, like some good storytelling to like, okay, so who's their audience? Like, clearly,
now who is this for?
Like, did the network be like, you need to sex it up? They need to be a bit more manly. It got too many emotions. Like, what?
Yeah, you need to sex it up. Can you add some porn? Like,
also, like, who's watching the pay-per-view porn at a
2007 was a different time.
If they have a laptop with internet.
You're so right, but I think that Sam just wanted to make a problem. He's acting out. He's not getting enough attention, so he's causing problems.
He needs enrichment in his enclosure.
So anyway, Dean walks in and he's like, okay, awkward. Anyway. Yeah, well, according to Lindsay...
Before you continue, I did click on in the episode, it says Latino porn in all caps. And then if you click on it, apparently it is actually just like Busty Asian Beauties. It is also an ongoing thing. It's called Casa Erotica, and the first featured on this episode is just a recurring thing, but then its 13th installment, shown in Hammer of the Gods, I believe that's that fucked up gods episode, played an important plot device as the last words of the Archangel Gabriel as a way to reseal Lucifer.
Yeah, I forgot that they said, yes, the Archangel Gabriel is starring in Latin in very racist porn.
Wow. Oh, and it does show up in other like different titles. So there's Casa Erotica 13, Casa Erotica Cabana Nights, and Tequila Bun Rise.
Guys, I almost said guys. Hey guys, I don't like it here.
It keeps appearing in different episodes with different gods, like the deity Vesta. Sam and Jody Mills find a DVD.
What? Now what? I don't know why. Why would they do this?
Casa Erotica 14 was used by the Archangel Gabriel to communicate with Castiel in the episode Metafiction.
No, when are we talking about? No, because the where's the Casa Erotica Cinematic Universe?
It has appeared in this episode in season 2, season 3, season 4, season 5, season 7, Pulky Pennywhistle's Magical Menagerie, where it's mentioned, season 9, and season 13.
I hate this. I can't do this.
It's so typical of Supernatural that some of its biggest Easter eggs are racist porn.
Yeah. The MCU could never.
The MCU could
Riverdale could never.
Actually, Riverdale probably could.
No. The Winchesters could never.
Oh, this is hateful. This is so hateful.
No, because unless they're referencing Casa Erotica in the Winchesters, MCU. I don't want it. In the Winchesters?
No, in the Winchesters. No, I do have a very real fear that, like, it's gonna have, like, their dad... We're gonna
see the filming of Casa Erotica 1.
What if their dad, like, is into, like, busty Asian beauties vintage or something, and they're like, oh, it's a reference to Dean, and his dad, like, the same thing. I'm like, I'm gonna want to fucking kill myself.
I'm gonna vomit. We need to continue.
Oh my god, this is horrible. I do forget sometimes how bad this show is.
We can't go off on a tangent on this one-off joke that it's not one-off.
No, I think this is important information because
it's lore.
We were talking too much about how good the show is. I mean, then we had a whole conversation about racism, but then we had talked too much about how good the show is. We just stay
humble ourselves. So Dean comes back to the hotel room and he's like, "Hey Sam, Angela's boyfriend Matt slit his own throat last night." And Sam's like, "Oh, that's a shame. I'm sorry to hear that." And Dean's like, "No, well, apparently, according to her roommate, he was seeing Angela everywhere before he died." And Sam's like, "Okay, well, like, that makes a lot of sense. Like, she just died. He's probably sad." And he's like, no. Like, he was, like, seeing her. Like, for real, like, seeing her.
He also, when he was talking to the dad in the office, he was like, does it feel sometimes like you see them everywhere? Like he was fishing for questions, and that's what made Sam be like, can you
need
not?
To stop.
And then when he talked to the roommate, she was like,
Lindsay.
It's like she was like, yeah, he just told she was like, yeah, the boyfriend, Matt, he kept telling me, like, it's like I see her everywhere. And so now Dean is like, see,
I was justified, you raggedy bitch. But he's like, yeah, and then I broke into Matt's apartment and found a bunch of dead plants, just like at the cemetery, and his goldfish was dead. And Sam was like, okay. And he's like, and I stole her diary. We need to talk to more of her friends to find out what her life was like and what was going on between her and Matt. And Sam was like, okay. Jesus, okay, fine. You're right, there's a case here. And they go through her diary and they find her friend Neil, who Neil, remember, in the cold open was the friend whose house she was at. So they go to Neil's house and they're like, we're grief counselors from the college. We realize this is a really tough time. And like, what's going on? What was happening? Like, you can talk to us. Is there anything you want to say about Angela or her relationship with Matt? Because Matt also just died. And Neil is like, I mean, honestly, like, I'm really okay. Like, I'm dealing. But I will say, like, Matt's death, if it was a suicide, was not because of grief, but because of guilt. Because Angela died because of Matt. Because she walked in on Matt having sex with another girl the night she died. And that's why she was so upset. And that's why she crashed her car. I gotta go get ready for work, so I'm gonna go. And they're like, oh, okay, so maybe, like, one of the big things was that they were like, there's no red flags with this girl. She seems really just nice. And they're like, okay, so now maybe there's, like, a vengeful spirit thing going on. So they're having this conversation, and Dean's like, well, you know what we have to do? Like, Sam is like, well, Matt's dead, so theoretically, she should be fine now. And, like her spirit should be restful. And Dina's like, no, we need to go make sure. So we have to go burn her bones.
Okay, and later in the episode they address this, but it's like, wouldn't the first thing be, okay, who did he cheat on her with? Not the bones, but okay.
Yeah, they're having issues. So they go to the cemetery. Dean and Sam are digging up the coffin. And they open the casket, and there is nothing in there. And they're like, oh, that's no good. But then in the top of the roof of the casket, they see a symbol carved. And Dina's like, I have seen this symbol before. So then they go back to Dr. Mason, her father's house. And Sam and Dean are like, what's going on? And Dean's like, oh, I'm pissed. These symbols, what, do you know this symbol, Dr. Mason? And he's like, oh yeah, like that's part of like a demonic ritual, like an ancient Greek ritual for communicating with the dead. And Dean's like, oh, so like it can bring, like it's for like necromancy. It can even bring corpses back to life. Like a zombie like, moment.
Yeah.
And Dr.
Like
Mason's Dr. Mason's like, yeah, like the legends. I mean, I don't know what you're talking. He's like, oh, well, you brought Angela back, and she's not your daughter anymore. She's a zombie. What's dead should stay dead. And he's like, where are you hiding her? And Dr. Mason's like, what are you talking about? I'm calling the police. And Sam is like, Dean, there are plants here that are alive. She is not here. You need to calm down. And Dean's like, fine, whatever. And he leaves. And Sam is like, I'm so sorry, Dr. Mason. I'm so sorry. He's having a bad time. I'm so sorry. I have to go. And they go outside. And Sam is like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You were acting crazy. Like, Dean, I don't scare easily, but you were scaring me. Like, you were a monster. And Dean's like, I can take care of myself. And Sam's like, no, you can't. You're being a jerk. And Dean's like, yeah, I am being an ass. But we have more important things to worry about. There's a zombie, and she is, like, killing people, and we need to figure out how to stop her. And Sam is like, man, our lives are so weird.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty classic moment where he's like, okay, yeah, that was kind of a crazy sentence.
Yeah.
It's very funny. Also, the consistent thing from here on in the episode of what's dead should stay dead is so funny to me, considering that it starts with their mother's grave. Spoiler alert. And then it's Dean who's the one saying it. He addresses that irony a little bit later, but
a lot. I think that's kind of the point of his turmoil in this episode.
Yeah, but that was one time. He dies so many other times that it's very funny. And I mean, granted, this is a problem they go through so many times, but it's just very funny to me.
So Sam and Dean go back to the motel, and they're trying to figure out how to kill, like, zombies. And Sam's like, this is ridiculous. There's so many methods because zombies are such a pervasive part of culture, like popular culture. There's so many things, and we don't know. Like, silver might work. Silver seems to be a thing. But what we should probably do is find the person who brought her back. And Dean's like, maybe it was her creepy little friend Neil. Like, according to her diary, Angela wrote, Neil's a real shoulder to cry on. He understands what I'm going through with Matt. And then Dean is like, he's a lot like Ducky, like from Pretty in Pink, who is in love with his best friend. And I was like, okay, Pretty in Pink mention, slay. But he's like,
he's very nice, guys finish last.
Yeah, but he's like, yeah, Neil is also Dr. Mason's teaching assistant, his TA, and he has access to all the same books. So that would make sense. So they go to Neil's house. And they break in, and the apartment is empty, but they both have 9mm. They're guns. They check the basement, and they are like, okay, no one's here.
Well, when they check the basement, there's like a bunker. Like someone's living down there, basically. And he's like, guess we found their zombie bunker, and she's not here. Shit. And they find like the grate that she crawled out of, and they're like, uh-oh.
Yeah, they're like, something's wrong. And Dean's like, okay, well, she's probably not gonna kill someone. Who would she want to kill? And he's like, oh, her roommate, Lindsay. Because you know what? Lindsay was sad that Angela was gonna, but she was really upset when she was talking about Matt. Maybe she's the one that Matt was cheating with. Smart king. So they go to Lindsay's house, and Lindsay is like looking, we see Lindsay, and she's looking at a photo of Angela and Matt, and she's like just really sad. And there's a knock on the door, and she's like, what? And she goes, and Angela shows up, and she's like, hi, I'm home.
She's like, hi, Lindsay, I'm home.
Hey, Lindsay.
The way she says it is so funny.
And then she starts attacking Lindsay with scissors. And misses. And Lindsay's like, please stop. And she kicks Angela and like stabs Angela with the scissors. And Lindsay's like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, oh my gosh. And then Angela gets up and grabs Lindsay by the throat and like starts trying to stab her with the scissors. And Sam and Dean burst in, and Dean fires like 3 bullets into Angela, like some in the back of her head and one into her chest. And she looks at them and she's like, okay. And she jumps out a window. And then Dean tries to follow her, but then he comes back in and he's like, damn, that dead chick can run.
It's really funny.
Yeah. So they go to Neil. They go to his office at the university, and they come storming in, and they're like, where are you keeping Angela? And Neil's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And they're like, yes, you do. He's like, she's at my house, but she hasn't left. And they're like, homeboy, yes, she has. Like, that is why Matt died. Like, she killed Matt. And he's like, oh, I don't know about that. And they're like, no, like, we do. And he's like, okay. And they're like, you need to perform another ritual, and we are going to try to nail Angela back into her grave bed, because that might work according to some of the literature. And Dean looks at his desk, and he sees a bunch of dead plants, and he's like, oh my god, Angela is not at your house. She is in the room. You need to get out as quickly as possible. Do not make her mad. But she cannot see that we were here, because you need to trick her to go there, because we're performing the ritual there, and we need her to go. So they leave. Then Angela comes out of the closet. And
good for her.
Be who you are. And Neil sees that she's like wounded. And he's like, what happened? I told you to stay in the basement. And she's like, I did. Well, no, I didn't. And he's like, oh my god, you did do that to Matt and Lindsay. What is wrong with you? And she's like, sorry, they were trying to hurt me. They wanted to hurt me. Like, what are you doing? And she gives him a little kissy. And she's like, Neil, please, you need to take me to the cemetery so we can kill those boys, so that we can live together and live a life of happiness. And then Neil's like, okay, yeah, give me 1 second. And he turns around and runs out to leave to go to his car.
He is not subtle.
No, and then she follows him and is like, okay, goodbye, and snaps his neck and kills him. So then we get to the cemetery, and Sam and Dean are lighting candles surrounding the gravebed, basically waiting for her to arrive. It looks like they are like setting up a ritual. And they're like, okay, Sam, you can be bait to lure her into her grave. And Angela sneaks up behind Sam, and Sam turns around and fires directly into her forehead. And now she is pissed. She starts like sprinting at Sam and knocking him over, and like fucks up his hand quite bad. And then Dean, who's behind Sam, is like, actually, I'm gonna hurt you, and fires some shots into her chest, and she falls back like into the gravebed. And then Dean jumps down and stabs her in her chest with a spike, and he's like, what's dead should stay dead. And then they rebury her corpse, and then it's the next morning, and they're...
Haha, think of how he dies.
We can't keep talking about the rusty nail.
I will never stop up.
So they're finished burying Angela's corpse. It's the morning. And they head back to the Impala. And Dean stops and looks at their mom's grave for a second and just kind of has a little moment. And then they're on the road in the car. And Dean pulls off to the side and gets out and sits on the hood. And Sam is like, hey, what are you doing? What's going on? And he's like, Sam, I should have died at that hospital. Like, I'm not stupid. Dad did something that saved me. Like, I made a full recovery when I should be, like, brain dead. Like, I was supposed to be dead. Like, what's dead should stay dead. And I was dead. And Dad did something. And it's not a coincidence that I heal. Then, like minutes later, Dad is dead and the cult is gone. The demon, he made some sort of... He did something. I don't know what, but he did.
Yeah, they don't really know about demon deals yet, it seems like.
Yeah, like, they kind of have... Yeah, like, they don't really quite understand. And he starts, like, crying, and Sam's like, but you're here. Like, it's okay. And, like, we can talk. And Dina's like, what could you possibly say that would make that all right? And then Sam just kind of is speechless. And then they just kind of sit on the hood of the car, and then the episode ends.
Like, they have so many, like, in the car talks, but when they gotta stop and get out the car, you're like, oh, damn. Okay, shit.
Yeah, that's when you know it's dark. When he said, I can't be driving right now, I'll crash.
Yeah. I mean, I guess he was really thinking about it, considering how this episode starts and how that girl was upset, and then she died in a crash. So he was being conscientious.
Yeah, he said, I can't do that. I can't be the next Angela.
Also, he was the Angela. He did die in a car crash.
He said, I can't do that again.
Damn, both of these episodes, they were like, let's get fucking deep, bro. Like, Jesus.
Yeah, honestly, I don't have that much else to add to this episode. I think it's nice that Dean is finally, like, you know, it's kind of fucked up that Dad died and I lived. Like, something happened there. Like, I'm excited that they're putting the pieces together.
Unfortunately, he does develop a complex about this in later episodes, and he's like, you know, even though they keep making deals for each other constantly, and you're like, this is just, it does not get any better. But I like this episode.
I like this episode a lot. I think what I also really like, I do like when the story, like the hunt, is relatively simple. Because, like, there's only a few characters. There's really, like, it's very, like, what it is. Like, it's like, girl gets brought back from the dead and tries to kill ex-boyfriend. Like, it's very simple. It's very trope-filled, which kind of gives us a little bit more time to focus on what the hashtag the boys are going through.
I do think it's very funny that, like, imagine you are a grad student and you are a classics grad student. You are very nice guys finish last. You're the love of your life. Your best friend dies. And you're like, what if I started doing some of the rituals in these ancient texts just to see if it works? Just to see. And then it does. And you're like, okay, well, I'm rolling with it. Like, what made him consider trying it? And I have to know.
And no one was like, why are you carving symbols into the top of her casket? What's going on with that?
Yeah, it was the top of her casket.
Like, it was inside, to be fair, but, like,
so much that I have so many questions about. I'm like, sir. But otherwise, again, this is one where they're like, okay, we're not dealing with any Christian mythology in this one, but...
Yeah, so it's not important.
Yeah, so it's gonna be very,
yeah.
Let's just say vague. They're like, so a Greek ritual. You're like, a what?
I think let's talk about the main important points of the show.
Yeah.
Dean is now upset because he realizes he probably should have died and is on the first part of his sort of survivor complex arc, and a fun little new porn Easter egg dropped. So that's the two good things I think from this episode.
Multiverse of madness.
This is my multiverse of badness.
Literally, it's like we got this fun little episode, but at what fucking cost? Well, thank you for listening. For more Cursed Supernatural content, follow us on social media at Mystery Spotcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also ask us Cursed Supernatural questions like the one we answered before in our TikTok Q&A or by emailing us at themysteryspotcast@gmail.com. If you enjoy listening to us suffer, please rate the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, Overcast, whatever you use. If it allows ratings and reviews, it helps people discover our show. Also helps to discover a show to send it to a friend. Send it to one friend. Send it to two. Be like a multi-level marketing scheme. If you want to hear more from us, we are also two of the co-hosts of Roop Helps Pod Race, a queer Star Wars podcast. We're doing a lot of cool and fun things while we wait for Andor to premiere, so you should come check it out. And we'll see you 2 Tuesdays from now for more slaying people, queer baiting things, the supernatural business.